welcome back to our Zechariah study. And we had just kind of started introducing the book last time. And we were reading, we had started to read a little bit on Zechariah's historical situation. So let's turn to that page. It's where we're going to pick up today. So just to review a little bit of what we've talked about so far, that Zechariah is writing at the same time or just maybe months after the prophet Haggai also wrote. This is during a time when King Darius of Babylon is in power. King Cyrus had declared that the people, after the exile in Babylon, that the people of Judah could go back home to their land and rebuild the city of Jerusalem and all that. And Cyrus even said that the Persians would pay for it. Persia, Babylon Empire would help pay for the rebuilding. So they go back to Jerusalem, and of course it's just a pile of ruins, and they need to start to rebuild the city. But this is no small task. So you ever know you need to do this big job, and you get to the job and you start, and it's like, I don't even know where to start. This is such a big job. I don't even know how to get started on this thing, you know. And so it was kind of like that. And the people, there were a lot of difficulties. And so what happens is there's this time period where they are between let's see, 1520. There is it's almost basically almost 20 years basically that it's not getting done. They're not rebuilding the temple and all this. This is also the time of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah as well. The rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, rebuilding the city, rebuilding the temple, and it's a big task. And so for almost 20 years, it just hasn't been getting done. And so there's sort of people are kind of wondering, is this ever going to happen? And is God ever going to return and dwell among us? And that's the big point, is the prophet Zechariah wants to tell the people, continue to trust in the Lord and continue to look to Him, and God will return, and He will fulfill His promises. So let's see, do we need, you guys want to share, or do you?
We can share.
Okay, so we're on Zechariah's historical situation, and we started to read the first couple of paragraphs and talk about those last time. But the last couple of, well, actually, the last sentence of the second paragraph there, drought brought with it crop failure, as Haggai says in chapter 1, leading to an inflation and acute hunger. And so this is another problem that's going on. Okay, so let's start with the third paragraph under Zechariah's historical situation. So somebody read the third paragraph for us.
Can I take it? During the second year of Darius, 520 BC, Haggai stepped into this dismal situation. He summarized this sorry state of affairs by depicting a person earning his wages only to put the money in a purse full of holes. Famine, fate, and foreign rule brought deep despair. People lived in the shadow of the past and the scarcity of the present, not knowing what the future held. Where was Yahweh during the early years of Darius's reign?
So things kind of had looked hopeful when the people could return to their homeland after 70 years of exile in Babylon. But think about it, 70 years, this means if you were one of the ones that went into exile in Babylon, it would be your grandchildren and great-grandchildren are the ones that are returning home to a home that they've never seen before, you know? And it's like, well, this is the grandparents' homeland, but what do we have to do with this place? But we know God has promised this land to our people, but God has forsaken us, and there's no temple to go to meet with God. So what's our relationship with God now at this point? And has God still abandoned us and forsaken us?
Yeah. This kind of reminds me when they came out of Egypt, and then they said, "Why have you brought us here to kill us?" You know, it's like,
yeah,
we were expecting great things, and now all of a sudden
it is just like that. I didn't really think about that, but that's exactly right. It's like, wow, look at what God did to bring us out of Egypt. All the plagues and parting the Red Sea and the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night and awesome things, feeding us with manna and all this stuff. But here we are in the wilderness, and it's like, for what, God? For what? You know?
I guess, Pastor, when they say, why has God forsaken us? I guess the question should be, did God leave you, or did you leave God?
Yeah, yeah, and that's part of it, and that's what the prophets had to get the people to see is, well, you left God, and then He abandoned you, but now Zechariah is gonna say, turn to the Lord, and He will turn back to you. He will return to you. So that's kind of the situation that Zechariah is like. Continue to trust in the Lord and hope in Him, and God is gonna fulfill His promises. Okay, let's look at the fourth paragraph there. Let somebody read that for us.
Yahweh was speaking through Haggai. The prophet's first date in the second year of King Darius in the 6th month on the first day of the month corresponds to August 29th, 520 BC. This is one of the 4 dates Haggai cites in his book. The last one is equivalent to December 18th, 520 BC. Through Haggai's ministry, though Haggai's ministry lasted not quite 4 months, Ezra's account of building the second temple mentioned him along with Zechariah. Both prophets addressed
Zerubbabel,
the governor of Judah, and Joshua the high priest.
Okay, so the Babel and Zerubbabel is, Babel means Babylon, and Zerubbabel means, or Zerub means seed. He is seed of Babylon. It's a Babylonian name, but he's the governor. He's a Judahite, and he's the governor of Judah now at this point, even though he's got this Babylonian name. And Joshua is the name of the high priest. Now Joshua is a fairly common name among the Israelites at this time, because you remember Joshua's successor is Joshua. Moses' successor is Joshua. And of course, the name Jesus is the same as Joshua. Jesus' name was pronounced Yeshua, which is very similar to Joshua, Yehoshua, same name. But so this was a common name. Even when Jesus came along, the name for him to have the name Yeshua, it's a common name, like Steve or something like that. You know, in our society, I just picked a random name of somebody not here. So.
Random name.
Okay, so it's just important to see how Zechariah's historical situation is tying into all these other Old Testament books. So you got Haggai going on at pretty much the same time, and Ezra and Nehemiah writing about this time period, and of course, and also the book of Esther is going to occur in this time period too, of post-exile, but she's in the land of Persia, and so there are some Jews that are still living in that area, Jews that haven't gone back to the homeland, to Judah. And that's where the book of Esther occurs, is in this time period around 500 BC. So. All right, let's look at now the fifth paragraph, starting with what was the problem. Would somebody like to take that one for us?
What was the problem? The building program had stalled for almost 20 years, even though Yahweh had stirred Cyrus so that he might rebuild the temple, or at least help finance it. Nothing had happened. God had set in motion massive political changes in the ancient Near East to get this job done, yet people were more concerned with home improvements and interior decorating than they were with Yahweh's temple. The city walls lay in ruins, another great disgrace.
Okay, so if you just kind of think practically here, if we've all been exiled, we'll just say exiled up to Canada or something, and then we're allowed to come back here to Wisconsin, and again, remember a place that you've never even been, but your grandparents grew up here. And it's like, okay, now you got to rebuild this town of East Troy. What's the first thing you're going to want to do? Well, I want to get my house, build my own house and get it in order first, right? And yet, but everybody would agree. I could go around and ask all of you, well, it's important to have a church, isn't it, people? Oh yeah, but just to pick on Larry was saying, but I'm trying to get my house built. I mean, we need to have we have to have a roof over our heads, Pastor, before we can even think about coming to church. But I'd be like, but church is important too, right? Well, we can't neglect the church. Yeah, but we've got other things going on in life, and you can understand how it would be like that, wouldn't it? Of course, church is important, Pastor, but there's too much to do, right?
Not only the house, they had a famine, they were trying to get food and everything else.
Can't we just have church under the poplar tree out here or something, Pastor, until we can at least get our own houses built and stuff like that? Well, yeah, but you've had 20 years, Larry. Come on. I think you could get your house built in 20 years. Come on. Come on, the church house.
The cost of materials has been high over the famine, so I got to use most of that money for food. So
COVID, Pastor, COVID. Nobody can get building materials. Oh yeah.
Well, what kind of interior decorating did you do in 520 BC?
Well,
dried flowers, wall
But they
painting.
just come from Persia, so they probably have some nice Persian rugs.
Yeah, they probably did bring some Persian rugs with them.
Pastor, it's so funny because the other day I was going through some old books. I have this old book of this church that my mother's family grew up in, called Zion Lutheran. It's up in northern Minnesota.
Oh.
And it's telling about how they built the first church, probably in the 1800s. And my great-grandfather, his name was in there, Emmanuel Johnson. And he said, well, he can't really help with the building of the church, but he's going to because he has to harvest, but he's going to donate the land.
Well, see, that's important too. We got to feed our families too. I mean, and that's hard work, right? So, okay. So any other questions or comments on that paragraph there? All right, well then let's move on to the "it was not difficult" paragraph. Would somebody take that one?
It was not difficult to delay the temple's construction. The Babylonians had devastated Judah. People needed to devote their time and energy to the task of sheer survival. Who had time to worry about religion? The ragtag group was overwhelmed in what seemed to be the never-ending task of rebuilding and restoration. Efforts also stalled because of opposition and apathy. What did Yahweh do to bring the Judeans to their senses and turn them to Him? Famine and drought? That got their attention.
Hosea 10:12
could have been their response. It's time to seek Yahweh.
All right, yeah. So it's what's important. Your relationship with the Lord is important, and that's why when Jesus came along, it was very important that He said, "Seek ye first God's kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things like building your house, raising your crops, and all these things will be yours as well. But seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness."
So, I guess to look at it, just what you said, if they're putting Him first, then the famine would not have come, right? Because they would put Him first.
Yeah.
And then are you putting Him first, or are you putting the famine first and saying, I'm doing this because of the famine, not because
exactly.
You gotta sort that out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that's kind of like when you're worried about your worries, or when you're worried about your troubles. That's See, again, this also ties into Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he's saying, why do you worry about what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? All these things, you know, even the pagans who don't believe in God worry about these things. But, you know, seek God, your relationship with Him, that's what righteousness is all about. And all these other things will be yours. But when you're worried about your worries, then it's sort of like Peter walking on the water, and Peter looking at the waves saying, wait a second, I can't walk on water. Well, where was the Peter from 30 seconds ago who said, I'm trusting in the Lord and I'm focusing on Him, and if He says I can walk on water, then darn it, I can walk on water, right? So where's that Peter? Now 30 seconds later you're seeing the waves and you're saying, I can't walk on water. So which is true, you know? If the Lord says, Peter, come, then you come, right?
And don't worry about the laws of physics, they don't matter at that point.
Yeah, exactly. It's my, Joel has heard the sermon often enough where it's Wile E. Coyote chasing the roadrunner, and he runs right off the edge of the cliff, and he's like, wait a second, I can't walk on air, you know, and then and that's when he falls, you know.
It's the law of cartoon physics.
But he hangs there until he realizes, wait a second, I can't walk on air.
The law of gravity doesn't aware until one's painfully aware of it.
Yes, exactly. So it's the whole idea here is, hey, focus on God and your relationship to Him, and then you're not going to worry about, let the drought come, let the troubles come, because we know God is with us and He'll protect us through it all. But if you worry about, no, I got to protect my own self, I got to protect my own family, I got to raise the crops, I got to build my house, I got to do this and I got to do that, then it's like, you're going to neglect your relationship with God, and then God is like, you feel like you need to take care of yourself? Well, let me send you this drought and see how you do in that, you know? So, yeah. All right, so let's look at so now it's easier to count from the bottom. Third paragraph from the bottom, when Haggai and Zechariah. Would somebody read that one for us?
When Haggai and Zechariah prompted Zerubbabel the governor and Joshua the high priest to begin rebuilding the temple, a certain Tattenai, governor of the Persian province beyond the river, along with another official named Sethar-Bozenai, tried to discourage the project. Tattenai sent officials to Jerusalem to challenge Judah's leaders, doubting that the Persians had authorized them to build the temple. Unsatisfied, they appealed to Darius.
You've really got a knack for the Babylonian names there. So. Shethar-Bozenai.
I might not have gotten any of them right, but the trick is just not to pause.
Go with it.
You put it out there and you sell it, Bill.
That's right.
And you sold it.
You don't have to know what you're doing, you just have to sound like you know what you're doing.
Tattenai was easy enough, but anyway, so they're trying to discourage the project. He sends, so Tattenai sends these officials to Jerusalem to challenge the leaders, doubting that the Persians had authorized them to build the temple. So they're saying, you guys, you know, they're trying to say, you're never going to get this done, and who gave you permission to build this? This is a Persian province now. You should be worshiping our gods. Maybe they're saying something like that. You should be worshiping our Persian gods. Who gave you permission to build this temple to your God? You know, and they're talking like that, and they're forgetting, or maybe they're hoping that the Judeans will forget. Well, your King Cyrus gave us permission to come back here and build the temple to Yahweh, the true God, the God of Daniel. You know, as Cyrus called him, and so. Your own king gave us permission, and it's a decree, and it cannot be changed, the decree of the Persians. So you remember from the book of Esther, where King Darius was tricked into basically declaring a genocide against the Jews. Okay, the day of, I can't remember what date it was in their dating system, but it was like, we'll say March 3rd is National Kill a Jew Day, and it's decreed, you know, written in stone, but King Darius, signed by King Darius, and it's like, you can't change that law once it's signed, just like in our society, right? And but Darius is like, oh, but my own queen, Queen Esther is a Jew, and I didn't even know it. Now what do we do? What do we do? And then he's like, okay, I can't change that March 3rd is National Kill a Jew Day, but I can say March 3rd I also declare is National Jews Defend Themselves Day. And so that's what it did, and the Jews defended themselves, and they called it the day of Purim, which means lots, because they cast lot. What day should we have National Kill a Jew Day? Well, let's roll the dice and see, you know. Oh, March 3rd, okay, sounds good. So the Jews kind of named it after the dice, because they rolled dice to say they're gonna kill us all, but the Lord defended us, and the Lord protected us, and so that's why they have their celebration of Purim dice. Okay. So anyway, the people appeal to Darius to say, "Hey, you got these officials here that are. We want to rebuild the temple, and they're saying we can't. And what's going on? What's going on?" And Darius, of course, says, "No, we did," or at least he looks in the Chronicles, or has his officials look in the Chronicles, and well, yeah, it is a law that they can go back to their homeland and build a temple to Yahweh their God. So we're going to still stick by that and let them do it. Okay, but for now, it is this is a serious threat. So the second to last paragraph. This was a serious threat. Cyrus had authorized the temple's construction, but he was long dead. After so much time had elapsed, would Darius remember or even care about a Persian decree that made almost 20 years earlier? Okay, and then the last paragraph, would somebody read that one? Or the last one on that page.
Darius located a scroll in the royal archives that authorized the endeavor. The king then sent notification to the local officials that they should do everything possible to assist the Judeans in their work. The temple was finished on the 3rd day of Adar in the 6th year of Darius's reign. That is March 12th, 515 BC. What a surprising turn of events for Tatnai and all who opposed the temple's construction.
Okay, so it's been a long time in coming, but they appealed back to Darius, and he said, yeah, we did give them permission to rebuild their temple, and in fact we were even going to help them pay for it, and so the Persians helped pay for it, and so on, and the temple finally does get built. Okay, let's continue on now, the top paragraph of the back page. Somebody read that one for us, starting with Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel is therefore Yahweh's commissioner, carrying out his orders. His rule ended about 510 BC. Elanthan, his son-in-law, succeeded him and ruled over Zerubbabel's daughter Shelomith until roughly 490 BC, 169 years after there were no more ruling Davidites.
Oh, actually, that 169, that's a page number from this commentary that
I gotta say, that's a long time.
That's the beginning of page 169 of the commentary. If you wanted to know any page numbers, but I did put it here. We're reading excerpts from Dr. Lessing's Zechariah commentary, so I didn't write all this. But
Here, I thought Roger was great adding a missing word.
So after that, there were no more ruling Davidites. That means a Davidite means a descendant of King David to rule on his throne. And there were for a while there, but then there weren't. And so the people were kind of wondering, is God going to fulfill his promise to send us the son of David, the descendant of David, to rule forever on God's throne?
During this time, did people still live as long as they did, like during the days of Moses and that?
No. This is still, now people are living typically as long as you and I do at this time, because it was basically after the flood of Noah. Before that, people were living to be 900 and 1,000 years old. But after the great flood, then God said, no, I'm going to limit people's years to 120. So basically, yeah. So people didn't live that long, and so anyway. All right, we ready to move on here?
So did those other kings die over when they say were succeeded? Or were they taken by the sword, died?
Let's see. So yeah, Elnathan, his son-in-law, succeeded him. So there were kind of governors basically at that point, but it was actually, this only lasted for a couple hundred years, because then in 330 BC is when Alexander the Great comes along and says, okay, the Greeks are now, the Macedonian Empire has taken over everything. We're going to be your rulers now. And so Alexander took over everything, and then they came under the Greeks. And that was, at that time, it was then during the next 150 years that they just hated it. I mean, well, especially once a certain Greek ruler named Antiochus the Fourth came along, and he said, we have all these Greek gods, and you're going to worship them. And in fact, I'm a god too, and I'm a god in the flesh. I'm Antiochus Epiphanes. You can call me Epiphanes, because I'm God in the flesh. I'm God revealed to humanity. And in fact, let's put up a statue of me in this new temple that you built a few hundred years ago, and you need a statue of me. And all the Jews are like, we can't, what? We can't do that? And that was like the abomination of desolation. They're calling it, like, you can't put an idol in the temple of Yahweh. And so they want to get rid of this Greek ruler Antiochus Epiphanes, and they call him in their own Greek language, Epimanes, which means madman, and they start to rebel against him, and so this started the big Jewish war, as it's called, where they're fighting for independence from the Greeks, and they want to be an independent nation at that point. Hey, let's get back to the days of King David, and when we were not only a unified nation, but we were independent, and we were great, and we want to get back to the good old days, and we need to rule ourselves, and God will bring us a King David again to rule over us, the son of David, and so they're like, but we got to be an independent nation to do that. So they fight for their independence. They kind of win their independence for a little bit. That's the war. That's also called the War of the Maccabees, because the families, the prominent families that led them in this war were named Maccabees. Judas Maccabeus was one of the prominent guys. But anyway, so they win their independence, but it doesn't go so well. They're not very good at governing themselves, and you have different groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the Pharisees say, oh, we think our guy should be a prince over the king, basically the king over this nation, and the Sadducees are like, no, our guy should be king, and they're fighting, and so they got civil war going on, and basically it got to the point where the Sadducees were saying, this is a mess, this is terrible, we can't even govern ourselves, and we got civil war going on. And so some of you have heard this story before, but it's a good review, and so it's actually kind of hilarious how it all plays out, because the Sadducees say, oh, this is terrible, we got a civil war going on. Well, now the power that's coming in the great world power is Rome. Rome has really been building up their armies and becoming a serious world power. And so they had won independence from the Greek Empire, but now they're independent and it's not going so well. So they appeal to Rome and they say, hey, can you bring over a great army or whatever? And you guys are known for peace, law, and order, So it's like they're calling the Roman police in to say, hey, help us establish law and order here. We can't do it. So the Sadducees are the ones to appeal to Rome. Rome sends this governor they have named Pompey, General Pompey. Maybe you've heard of him. There's a city named after him in Italy, and there was a big volcano that buried everything in ash at Pompeii. But anyway, so General Pompey comes in, and he's like, okay, the Romans are taking over this place. You guys are, just killing each other. We're going to establish peace and law and order in this place. And we're going to call it a Roman colony now. And the Jews, the Sadducees, are the ones that had sent to Rome. But actually the Pompey came in, and he's kind of listening to both sides. The Pharisees say this, and the Sadducees say this, and the Sadducees are kind of the liberals, and the Pharisees are the conservatives. And Pompey is listening. He's like, actually, you Sadducees, the liberals, are the ones that called me, but I kind of agree with these guys, the conservatives over here, the Pharisees. They're the ones that are right, but it was most hilarious. But anyway, so that's when the Romans came in, and that's around, I don't remember the year, but over 100 years before Christ, basically, we're talking about. So that's why, in Jesus' time, that's why the Romans are taking over. So all this history of the 500 years before Christ it's really just kind of a political mess, is kind of the point of all this. And so they're just, by the time when Jesus comes along, they've just kind of settled into a groove, and they got their temple, and they complain about the Romans and all the taxes, but for the most part, they shouldn't complain too much. The Romans have established law and order. They live in a pretty peaceable society, and yeah, they got to pay their taxes, but they're free to practice their religion. It's actually not a bad time, even though it kind of felt like oppression under the Romans. What's that, Scott?
So just like the liberals today, we want more government.
Yeah, more government.
Please
More
tell
government.
us what to do.
It was exactly like that, But the Pharisees are like, well, we want you guys to kind of establish law and order, but other than that, just stay out of just let us practice our religion, just let us live at peace and stay out of the way. You can govern us, but stay out of the way, It's like the conservatives nowadays, right?
This is a tidbit of information, but volcano in Pompeii, 1966, I went to the top of it, and there's still smoke coming out of it.
Oh, okay.
All those years, yeah.
Wow. Huh. So yeah, I'm not sure if
They don't
that's
go away, they just go dormant.
That must have been.
because that was like, I think in the 1st century that erupted, or like somewhere around, I don't remember the year, but somewhere around 90 to 100 AD or something like that is when it went off. So that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's see where we're. Oh yeah, so we need to finish up this thing. Okay, so we're on the second paragraph from the top on the 2nd page there. The biblical record is clear. Would somebody read that paragraph for us? A few Babylonian names in there, but you'll get through them.
I'll tackle that.
Sheshbazzar is one.
The biblical record is clear. Sheshbazzar was Judah's first governor, appointed by Cyrus to rebuild the temple and return the liturgical vessels confiscated earlier by the Babylonians, as found in the book of Ezra. Most likely, Sheshbazzar was a non-Davidic Judean official commissioned as the first leader in the Persian-ruled Judah. Now, Sheshbazzar had Zerubbabel take the lead in rebuilding the temple because Zerubbabel was a Davidite, and he was not. Ezra never calls Zerubbabel governor because all but one of the references to him in Ezra are about his work under the governorship of Sheshbazzar, as found in those passages from Ezra. The only exception is Ezra 5 verse 2, when Zerubbabel resumes building the temple in 520 BC. Consequently, Zerubbabel initially served under Sheshbazzar and succeeded him as Judah's governor. But it is difficult to determine when Sheshbazzar finished his work and when Zerubbabel began.
Okay, so the point is, you have Zerubbabel is of the house of David, but he's not a king. They can't have a king because Persia is the one ruling over them at this time. So that's why they can't have a king. They're not a self-governing nation at this point. So Zerubbabel is of David's family. He's serving under this other governor, Sheshbazzar, who's appointed by King Darius. And he was appointed by Cyrus to rebuild the temple. And so Zerubbabel is under Sheshbazzar, and he's not even called governor. He's like, what do you call it? Lieutenant governor. Is that how we say in our state or something like that? Okay, and then Sheshbazzar stepped down or died or whatever, and Zerubbabel takes over. But again, the point is, he is of the line of David, but he's not a king, and there won't be a Davidic king as long as, basically up until like the time of Jesus. You have King Herod, who's really just the king, sort of like the King of England today. He's called king, but he's really just not. I mean, Parliament is what runs things in England, you know. So the king or queen of England is just sort of an honorary kind of title. I mean, they would say, oh, it's real, you know, the monarchy is real, you know, all this stuff continuing from, years ago. But the point is, he's not really a king. And it was like that with King Herod in Jesus' time too. Well, yeah, he kind of ruled things, but really everybody knew the Romans were in charge. Caesar was the king, right? And Herod was just kind of his puppet, so to speak. So, okay. So in reality, you could say from the time of, basically from the Babylonian exile on, there would not be a true king over Israel ever again. You know, and now, well, of course, so Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. Basically, Israel was not a nation, a self-governing nation or anything until 1947, I think it was, or was it 48, somewhere in there, when Israel became a nation again. But they don't have kings now. They have a president like we do, right? So, okay, now the last paragraph under that section there, starting with Zerubbabel. Somebody want to take that one?
Zerubbabel, though a type and a foreshadow, was not the sprout, the Messiah whom Zechariah predicts in 3:8 and 6:12. Judah's governor did not bring with him days of peace and prosperity. Neither did he sit upon the throne and serve as a priest. Zechariah 9:9 instead envisions the ultimate Davidic king coming after Judeans rebuild the temple. He is an eschatological figure who must suffer and die. Then at his second coming, he will rebuild God's final and glorious temple that expands beyond Jerusalem to encompass the new heavens and the new earth.
Okay, so to understand what we're reading in Zechariah and Zechariah's own perspective is, he's in Jerusalem at this time, 520 BC, and he's talking about the circumstances then, but he's also seeing into the future when God sends the Messiah, and he's seeing into the ultimate future of when this Messiah makes all things new, and he's seeing all the way to Judgment Day and beyond. So that's what Zechariah is seeing in his visions. And of course, he doesn't always understand all of that, but he sees God sending this new son of David king, and that he is going to suffer and die for his people. And we'll see that in Zechariah. And but we also know that he is going to build not just a temple in Jerusalem, not rebuild Solomon's temple, but he's going to build an ultimate temple. He's going to build the kingdom of God on earth, which we call the Christian church. the true Zion that starts in this world but continues forever and ever, even into the age to come.
What does eschatological mean?
Eschatological, that means the end times, that means the goal, when God, what we would call for shorthand heaven. When we get to heaven, we say, when we get to heaven, it'll be like this or that or whatever. That's what we're talking about, is when we reach the goal, when Christ comes again, when he makes all things new, however you want to kind of describe all that and say, in the end, you know, when we're finally in heaven with the Lord or something like that. But then I'd have to push you and say, what do you mean by heaven? That we'll be in heaven with God. What do you mean by heaven? Well, we're talking about when God makes all the cosmos, everything new, and gets rid of all the enemies, and we live in peace. And, you know, what the Bible calls New Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem. So, okay, does all that make sense?
So when people talk about end times, that's, you're trying to get there, but then the eschatological, that means you made it?
Yeah, eschatological means like, if you picture a football game, it's when the team gets into the end zone, right? End zone, that is, we accomplished the goal, yay, it's, you know. And this is the winning touchdown with, you know, when you started the play with only 2 seconds left in the game and you crossed the goal line and we just scored, game over, right? So that's what we mean by eschatology or eschatological, is we've reached the goal, right? So, and we're not there yet, by the way. Where we are now is Jesus is bringing us, and we're maybe in the red zone or something like that, red zone, but it's treacherous in the red zone, right? A lot of things can go wrong before you get to the goal line. But stick with Jesus, we will make it to the goal. But so that's why when the apostles say, we're in the end times now already, people, they're saying, hey, we're in the red zone, we're poised to score. Don't give up until we're in the end zone. To use our football metaphor, but I think we all understand that, right? So, I press on toward the goal, Paul says. So he's using that same kind of language, right? Press on toward the goal. Okay, let's look at do we have time? Yeah, just enough time to finish this section, Haggai and Zechariah. So let's look at that. So the first paragraph under there, somebody?
Haggai and Zechariah worked together, shared the same convictions, and saw themselves at the dawn of a new age. Their oracles from Yahweh addressed the historical situation of the period in which they lived. Their inspired messages were molded for current events. Haggai and Zechariah exhorted people too busy with their own concerns to rebuild the temple.
Okay, so this is just kind of summarizing what we've talked about here, that, hey, it's important that we have a spiritual life with God, and God says he will return, and he will have his dwelling among us, and we can meet him, and we can be with him. But we gotta prioritize our relationship with the Lord, people. Right? Okay, the second paragraph, would somebody take that one?
Haggai is chiefly concerned with the people's misplaced priorities. They were privileging domestic matters over spiritual issues. Zechariah's emphasis is the temple's meaning and symbolism. Its completion
Legitimatized
the mission of the current leadership, Zerubbabel and the high priest, Joshua. Zechariah also believed that finishing the temple would bring about Yahweh's global mission plans. Both prophets envision more glorious days ahead.
Okay, so the prophets don't know, can't see a timeline, but they're thinking Yahweh is going to return to his temple once we get it built, and the Lord is going to dwell among us, and in fact, he's going to send the king, like King David, the ultimate king, the Messiah, and he's going to rule, and we're going to live in peace and joy, and he's going to defeat all the enemies, and it's going to be good. So it's sort of like you're looking to the future, and they're seeing all the way to what we call heaven, but it's all squashed together into one, you know, like one flat picture. They're seeing is like, oh, everything's going to be good. We're going to be with the Lord in heaven forever, and enjoy and peace and safety and all that. Everything's going to be perfect once Messiah comes. But of course, we know Jesus came, and even John the Baptist is like, I thought you were going to fix everything when you come. And Jesus is like, I am, but it's going to take time, more time than you think. And that's one of the things that I think Zechariah, he probably knew the book of Daniel too. And that's where Gabriel comes to Daniel and says, God is going to do this thing. He's going to build his kingdom, this eternal kingdom. And there's going to be the king, the one like a son of man. And he's going to rule over God's eternal kingdom. But it's going to take more time than you think, because he's going to build up this kingdom over a period of time on earth. And then God will fulfill all things. Then will come the determined completion. But it's going to take time. He's going to build it on earth. See, that's the thing. So the prophets are seeing this, but they don't know a timeline. That's the thing. All right, where was that, the second paragraph? So yeah, so we have just the last paragraph then, right? Somebody take that.
Haggai stresses the necessity to rebuild the temple as a precondition of Yahweh's return. On the other hand, Zechariah announces that it is Yahweh's return that makes the construction of his house possible. This perspectives do not contradict one another, but rather complement each other.
Okay, so we've got our governor and our high priest, and they are people in positions of authority over us that God has given to help us to do this rebuilding, and they're the ones that enable us to have a worship life. Is because God's given us a governor and a high priest. The high priest, of course, is in charge of all the worship life of God's people, and so that's why in the earlier paragraph it says the temple's completion would legitimize the mission of the current leadership of the governor and the high priest, is because, hey, the Lord is with us now. That's the point. The Lord is with us. You don't have to wait until you get the whole temple rebuilt. The reason why we can rebuild the temple is the Lord is with us. And that's kind of the point. And you don't have to only be at the temple and in the temple to be with the Lord, because the Lord is with us now. So.
It's kind of like saying today, we can be at peace with the world. The United States society can't give us the peace, but within our hearts of Jesus, he can give us that peace back.
Yeah.
We don't have to wait for it.
Yeah, exactly. And and we've got it already, and that's the thing, is the Lord has promised to be with us, and that when we build this temple, and he's going to bless it, and he's going to dwell there, and we're going to meet with him, and everything is going to be good, but we have to make this a priority, people. Yeah, Barb.
I should know this, but I don't. What happened to Israel then, all those hundreds of years? You said 1948 became a nation.
Yeah, so they weren't.
Who ruled it?
They weren't really an independent nation. I guess I'm not quite sure how it. I have to look up like what was their political situation. Like, how did they still have like governors or who? Yeah, I'm not quite sure, because they, or at least they didn't. It was in 1947 or 48, whenever it was. I forget the year, but they is when they actually declared we're gonna call this nation Israel again. I mean, it's gonna be a official political nation, but before that it wasn't.
I believe before that it was under British control, and after
was it
World War
British?
II and
Okay.
the Holocaust, they decided to give it back to them.
Yeah, that's what it was.
But
yeah,
before the
sort of.
British control, there's still
Okay. Yeah, so
Not
Like
years.
Palestine or something, I don't know.
well,
yeah,
the Romans are the ones that called it Palestine when they took over. That's where
Oh,
the name
yeah.
originally came from.
Yeah. So yeah, it was sort of, yeah, it was like a British colony kind of thing, yeah,
I think
sort of like Hong Kong was for a long, long time.
the Jewish nation didn't have any borders. I think they were just a group of believers,
Oh,
you know, the
okay.
same,
Mhm.
because they were in Poland, they were in Russia, the Second World
Well,
War.
yeah, the Jews were scattered all around, yeah.
Until
Especially
after
after
the
the
World War II,
destruction.
like the UN or whoever decided, all right, we're gonna give them this now, like they changed all the other borders, it's, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Changed the names of the countries and made a new map and.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting how you got your religion and your politics, and the politics is like, well, what's a nation and what's not, you know? It's wherever all the other countries and everybody agrees, okay, well, we're gonna draw these borders, and this is what's gonna be this land, and this is the type of government it's gonna have, and they're human decisions, but that's.
And then they
that's how it
change their
goes.
minds, and we have wars.
And then we move borders and all that kind of stuff too, right?
We're the historians when you need them.
How many centuries and generations God's sitting up there watching these people go through the same thing over and over and over? He's gotta be saying, what slow learners? You see all this going in, we look at this and say, hey, that's happening today. Well, it happened 37 times before.
Yeah.
You know?
Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah. And what Christians often forget, and Jews too, is God never made promises about any political nation. He said, Abraham, I'm giving you this land. The land is part of God's promise, yes, but not a nation, not kings, not any of that kind of stuff. Although God did say to King David, your descendant I will make rule on your throne forever and ever. So there's one king God has promised. Jesus is the only king God has ever promised to Israel. The rest were all like come and go, you know, easy come, easy go kings, right?
Didn't God promise Abraham his children would become a great nation?
Yeah.
You said he didn't promise a nation. It was like
Well, not a political nation,
political nation,
but
no, but a nation in that sense.
yeah. And in fact, that's why the Apostle Paul is like, when you want to think of the children of Abraham, think spiritual, those who have the faith of Abraham, believing like Abraham did. And in that sense, even Gentiles are brought in and brought into this faith of Abraham and brought into this family of Abraham.
For which we're really thankful.
Yeah. So that's why we can say Father Abraham. Abraham is our father, right? So, all right. Well, it's we've run out of time. So, in fact, kept you over time. So the Sunday school teacher will be hollering at me. Okay. Well, let's pray. Thank you, God, for this time spent together in your word, and we thank you that we are able to study how you speak through the prophet Zechariah, and especially we look forward to learning about your promises about the Messiah, our Savior, and the ways that you bring salvation to all of us. We ask you to bless us as we go forth into our daily tasks that you have given to us in our week ahead, that you would help us to shine your light and show forth your love in all that we say and do. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you,
All right,
Pastor.
yeah, thank you all for coming.